Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today we're going to be talking about a fascinating interview with Graham Hancock on the Joe Rogan Experience.
Yes, a great interview.
Now, if you're not familiar with Graham Hancock's work, he's known for challenging conventional views on history and the timelines of civilization, especially when it comes to archaeology.
He really delves into a lot of different fields, to build these arguments. Like not just archaeology,
Right.
Geology, ancient myths. It's really fascinating.
He connects these dots that a lot of people don't even think about connecting.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes you really re-examine some things you thought you knew about the past.
Absolutely.
So one of the big things that Hancock really pushes back against is this idea that archaeology is always this completely objective, scientific pursuit.
Right. It's almost like he sees it as a little bit of a gatekeeper sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. And he points out that a lot of archaeological discoveries are made by chance. You have construction projects that unearth artifacts or things like that.
It makes you wonder, right? What are we missing?
Absolutely.
Just because we haven't stumbled upon it yet.
Well, and he brings up, the Amazon rainforest. He talks about underwater regions that have yet to be explored archaeologically.
So much we don't know.
So much. And speaking of things we might not know, Rogan brought up this crazy story in the interview about this gold miner in Alaska.
Oh, yeah?
Who found a boneyard. Just this massive, massive collection of bones of megafauna, like mammoths and giant bears.
Crazy, right?
Just a ton of them, all concentrated in this one area. And what's even more wild is that some of the bones show signs of being worked with tools, like human tools.
Which lends credence to this theory, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis.
Right.
Have you heard of that one?
I have.
So this suggests that a comet hit the Earth like 12,800 years ago and caused just massive upheaval, right? Wildfires, melting ice caps, extinction.
I mean, just imagine the impact on any civilizations that might have existed at that time. I mean, their knowledge, their technology potentially just wiped out in an instant.
It's gone. Like it never happened.
Crazy. And this really ties in with Hancock's explorations in the Amazon rainforest, right? Because this is an area that hasn't really been explored archaeologically as much as other places.
Not at all. But we're finding more and more now with things like LIDAR, which, can see through that dense vegetation.
Right. And one of the most significant findings has been terra preta, which is this fertile man-made soil that they found all over the Amazon. And it dates back thousands of years. So this is showing us that there were sophisticated agricultural practices happening in the Amazon way earlier than we thought.
Yeah, way earlier. It really changes the narrative of, those hunter-gatherers passing through every once in a while.
Right, like it was sparsely populated.
Yeah.
It's not the case. And then on top of that, you have these incredible geoglyphs, which are these massive earthworks that, have been revealed by deforestation. And they show these huge geometric shapes that were carved into the landscape.
It's pretty mind-blowing.
I mean, the scale of these things is incredible. And Hancock talks about flying over them and just being in awe.
I bet. I mean, it points to some serious social organization, right?
Yeah.
And astronomical knowledge, too.
Yeah.
It's not something you would typically associate with a quote-unquote primitive culture.
Right. And one of the most interesting connections, I think, that Hancock makes is between the patterns of these geoglyphs and the visions that people experience during ayahuasca ceremonies. So for those who don't know, ayahuasca is a powerful plant medicine used by indigenous cultures in the Amazon. And it's known to induce these really profound altered states of consciousness.
I mean, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If they were using ayahuasca to, design and build these structures.
It really makes you question what we consider to be primitive versus what we consider to be advanced.
Yeah, right.
I mean, what other knowledge did these cultures possess that we might not even be aware of?
Absolutely. And when we're talking about challenging those traditional timelines of civilization, we have to talk about Gobekli Tepe, this site in Turkey. That dates back to 11,600 years ago.
Which predates agriculture.
Predates agriculture.
Right.
Predates a lot of things that we think of as being essential for complex societies.
It's like finding a skyscraper in the Stone Age.
It really is. I mean, you have these massive stone pillars, some of them weigh up to 20 tons.
Yeah.
With these intricate carvings.
I mean, how did a pre-agricultural society manage to build something so complex?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And what were they trying to communicate through these carvings?
It's pretty amazing. And Hancock really believes that this points to a sudden leap in technological capability rather than the slow, gradual evolution that mainstream archaeology often talks about.
Yeah, he's not afraid to challenge those assumptions. And it's
Right.
refreshing.
Yeah. And he points out some interesting details in the carvings. Like there's a wild boar, there's a fox with streamers that almost look like meteor trails.
Could these be, representations of astronomical events, deities?
Who knows? But it's fascinating to think about.
For sure. And that leads us to another area where Hancock really goes against the grain, the dating of the Great Sphinx in Egypt.
Oh, yeah.
So he's been arguing for a long time that the Sphinx is much older than the conventional date of 4,500 years.
Right?
He says it could be over 12,000 years old.
Hmm.
And he uses evidence of water erosion patterns on the monument to support his claim.
Yeah. He points to that a lot. And there's all this debate surrounding the face of the Sphinx, whether it was recarved at some point.
Yeah.
But then you also have the astronomical alignment of the Sphinx with the constellation Leo during the spring equinox.
Right.
12,500 years ago.
That's a big difference.
Yeah. Like all these clues point to a much older timeline.
It's like a puzzle, isn't it?
Mm.
Trying to piece together these different clues. And it makes you wonder, are we getting the whole story?
Exactly. I mean, Hancock really emphasizes the importance of myths and storytelling in preserving knowledge across generations, especially when you consider events like that Younger Dryas impact.
Makes sense, right?
Hmm.
Because they didn't have the same systems of recording history as we do.
Right.
So their knowledge was passed down through oral traditions, stories, myths.
It's almost like encoded memory.
Yeah, like these stories are carrying the memories of these events that might have been forgotten otherwise.
He uses this great analogy comparing myths to dreams. He talks about this ancient Greek idea that there are two kinds of dreams. You have the dreams from the Gate of Ivory,
Okay.
which are meaningless, and then you have the dreams from the Gate of Horn, which are true-telling. So he suggests that we should approach myths with that same kind of discernment, looking for those hidden truths within those narratives.
That's really interesting. So not just dismissing them as fantasy.
Right, exactly, because they could hold these clues to a lost world.
Yeah, a time before written history.
And this kind of leads us into another fascinating area of Hancock's work, his explorations of altered states of consciousness, particularly through ayahuasca and DMT.
Yeah, he's very open about his own experiences with these substances.
Yeah.
And how they've shaped his understanding of ancient cultures.
Right. I mean, he believes that these altered states might have played a big role in the spiritual and intellectual lives of these ancient societies.
Because, he sees a connection between the visions that people have during these ceremonies.
Yeah.
And the imagery, the symbolism found in ancient myths and art.
He describes his own ayahuasca experiences as these journeys into the subconscious, where he encounters these archetypal figures, and he gets these incredible insights.
Wow.
It's a really different way of looking at consciousness.
It is.
It kind of suggests that these ancient cultures, they weren't as primitive as we might think.
That makes me think about something else that came up in the interview. Artificial intelligence and its potential role in understanding the past.
Oh, yeah.
Like, think about those ancient scripts that we haven't cracked yet, like Rongo from Easter Island. What if AI could help us decipher them?
Oh, wow. That would be incredible.
It would be the most cutting-edge technology, helping us to understand these really ancient forms of communication.
That's kind of mind-blowing, and it really highlights what this whole deep dive is about, right? We're looking at these ancient mysteries, but we're also thinking about how they connect to our present.
To our future, even.
Yeah.
I mean, they talked about something really interesting. What if our civilization were to collapse?
Oh, wow.
Just like the ones they were discussing. What would future archaeologists think?
Right, like what would they find? What would they make of it?
Exactly.
Like they talked about the Las Vegas sphere.
Oh, yeah.
Just imagine thousands of years from now, archaeologists stumble upon this giant glowing orb in the desert.
You'd probably think it was something out of this world.
Right. Would they have any idea what it was, what it meant? It just really shows you how important context is when you're trying to understand the past.
And it makes you think, are we even capable of understanding the past?
Right, like, do our own biases and assumptions get in the way?
I think it's a real possibility.
Especially with ancient cultures. Like, maybe they had ways of understanding the world that we've completely lost touch with.
Knowledge systems that are just alien to us now.
Yeah. And I think one of the big takeaways from this conversation is that we shouldn't assume that just because a culture is ancient, that they were less intelligent or less advanced than we are.
Right. We have to be careful about projecting our own values onto the past.
Yeah. And Hancock's work, it really pushes you to reconsider those assumptions. and be open to the possibility that these ancient cultures, they might not have been that different from us.
In some ways, they might have even been more advanced in ways that we don't even fully grasp.
And maybe there's things we can learn from them about how to live sustainably, about our relationship with the nature, about the power of the human mind.
That's a good point. There's definitely wisdom to be gained from looking to the past.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think this deep dive has been a real eye-opener, and it's definitely made me want to learn more about these topics.
Me too. It's like opening a door to a whole new way of seeing the world.
And I think that's what's so great about these conversations. You know, they make you question, they make you wonder, they make you want to explore further.
And that's what it's all about, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Keeping that curiosity alive.
Exactly. So we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll delve even deeper into some of these ideas. So stay tuned.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that idea of lost knowledge, it ties back to Hancock's argument about those myths and how they might hold more than just stories, right? Like they could be these encoded memories passed down through generations of real events.
Yeah.
And these insights into the nature of reality,
Well, he specifically talks about flood myths, right? Which you find in cultures all over the world.
Right.
And so could those be a collective memory of a global cataclysm? Maybe even something connected to the Younger Dryas impact.
It's fascinating to think about.
It is. How these ancient cultures, without our technology, without our methods of recording history, might have understood and recorded these kinds of events.
Makes you wonder.
Yeah. And it's interesting, too, because Hancock's own experiences with those altered states of consciousness have really influenced his interpretation of those myths.
Yeah, he sees these connections between those visions people have during ayahuasca ceremonies and the symbolism that you find in a lot of these ancient narratives.
He describes his ayahuasca experiences as these journeys into the subconscious, where he encounters these archetypal figures and gets these incredible insights.
Wow.
It's a totally different way of looking at consciousness.
Right.
And it suggests that maybe these ancient cultures weren't so primitive after all.
I mean, maybe they tapped into something that we're only just beginning to understand now.
Right. And this brings us to something else that I found really fascinating in the interview, that they talked about artificial intelligence.
Oh, yeah.
And its potential role in deciphering these ancient languages.
Interesting.
Think about scripts like Rongorongo from Easter Island, which, we still haven't been able to fully crack.
Right.
What if AI could help us unlock those mysteries?
It's almost poetic in a way.
Yes.
The most cutting-edge technology, helping us understand the most ancient forms of communication.
It is, and I think it really gets to the heart of what makes this whole deep dive so compelling. It's not just about these ancient mysteries for their own sake, but it's about how they connect to our present and even our future.
Right, exactly.
And they brought up something I thought really interesting, that what if our civilization were to collapse?
Oh, wow.
Just like the lost civilizations they were discussing, what would future archaeologists make of the remnants that we leave behind?
Right. Like, what would they think?
They use the example of the Las Vegas sphere.
Oh, yeah.
So imagine thousands of years from now, archaeologists stumbling upon this massive glowing orb.
It would be pretty wild.
Would they have any idea what it was, what it represented? It just really reminds you of how much context matters when you're trying to interpret the past.
It does make you think, are we misinterpreting the past?
Yeah.
Because we're looking at it through our own lens.
Right, our own cultural framework, our own technological framework. What if these ancient cultures had knowledge or ways of understanding the world that we've just totally lost touch with?
Like we're missing a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and I think it's humbling to think about that maybe we're not as advanced as we think we are.
Right.
And it brings us back to that question of what makes a civilization advanced? Is it technology? Is it social structures? Is it something more intangible, like their connection to nature or their understanding of consciousness?
It's a good question. And one that's not easily answered.
No, but I think it's a really important question to be asking ourselves.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me from this whole deep dive is that maybe these ancient cultures weren't as different from us as we might think.
Right. And maybe there's a lot more that we can learn from them than we realize.
Like about sustainability, about living in harmony with nature, about the power of the human mind.
It's like history isn't just this collection of facts and dates.
Right.
It's a living, breathing story, and it's still being written.
And each new discovery, each new interpretation just adds another layer to that story.
And Hancock's work, even if you don't agree with all of his conclusions, it definitely makes us think differently about that story.
It does. It encourages us to be skeptical, to question those narratives, to be open to the possibility that there's a lot more to uncover about our past.
Because who knows what we might find?
Exactly. It's like the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know.
And that's the beauty of it.
It is. And, thinking about those ancient cultures and their potential understanding of consciousness, it makes me think about the work that's being done today with psychedelics, like what Hancock experienced with ayahuasca. There's this renewed interest in exploring the potential of these substances for healing, for personal growth, even for scientific discovery.
Yeah, you're right. And there's definitely a parallel there.
Yeah.
And it's not just anecdotal evidence anymore. Like you have organizations like MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. They're doing some really rigorous scientific research into the therapeutic benefits of these psychedelics for conditions like PTSD, depression.
Wow.
It's amazing.
It's almost like we're coming full circle.
Yeah.
Rediscovering practices and knowledge that these ancient cultures might have had, an intuitive understanding of.
Right. And it makes you wonder, what else did they know about the human mind, about our place in the universe that we've lost touch with? I mean, Hancock really emphasizes this idea of reconnecting with that ancient wisdom, not just for individual growth, but for the sake of our planet. He sees this connection between our current environmental crisis and this disconnect from nature, from a more holistic way of understanding the world.
Right. It's like we've become so focused on technology and progress that we've forgotten about the importance of living in harmony with the natural world.
Yeah. And that brings us back to that question of what would we leave behind if our civilization were to collapse?
Yeah.
What would those future archaeologists see? Would they recognize us as this technologically advanced society? Or would they just see the things that led to our downfall?
Right. Well, they talked about that, about how, our obsession with technology might be misinterpreted by future generations.
Yeah.
And they use the example of the Las Vegas sphere.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
This incredible feat of engineering. But what does it really say about us as a culture?
Would they see it as a symbol of our ingenuity?
Yeah.
Or a monument to our excesses?
Yeah, our detachment from nature. It's a really interesting thing to think about. What legacy are we creating? What story are we leaving behind?
It's a question we should all be asking ourselves.
It is, but it's also kind of empowering too, right?
Absolutely.
We have the opportunity to change that narrative. We can make different choices. We can learn from the mistakes of those past civilizations.
Yeah. And Hancock's work at its core, it's a call to action. He's challenging us to wake up. To question the status quo, to realize that we're not just passive observers of history, we're active participants in shaping the future.
And maybe, just maybe, by rediscovering that wisdom of those ancient cultures, by embracing new ways of thinking, by reconnecting with ourselves in the natural world, we can create a more sustainable and fulfilling future. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the key things that you're taking away from this conversation?
Well, for me, it's a reminder that we're part of something much bigger than ourselves, We're connected to this long chain of human history with all its triumphs and tragedies, its mysteries, its lessons. And it's up to us to decide what kind of story we want to add to that chain.
Beautifully said. I think this deep dive has been a real journey, not just through time and space, but also through different ways of seeing the world. And I hope it's inspired you out there to keep questioning, keep exploring, keep diving deep into those mysteries that surround us. Till next time, keep seeking, keep learning, and keep wondering.